Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions to smaller deals that you can do even without significant capital. My name is Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest podcast. Let's get started. DealQuest community, I'm so excited to talk to you this week about this topic. It's a little bit of a drill down on a couple of things, but really the bigger topic is things that folks may not recognize that there's an ability to monetize in a deal. There's things that people understand even if they haven't done it, whether it's buying or selling the assets of a company or the equity, the stock or membership interest in an LLC of a company. They understand, buying and selling hard assets. I talked about licensing in the past, but there are some things that, people think of less. There's really one I'm going to focus on mainly, but I'll mention a couple of others just because there's too many folks out there who are actually doing what I would call, all of the elements of a deal, except for not structuring it like a deal and not getting certain tax benefits and other benefits they can get if they structured it differently. So the high level topic is, hey, there's some things out there that you may have that are, let's call it an asset that you can monetize that you may not realize that you can monetize. The first place that I want to start is something that I have mentioned a little bit before, but mainly in connection with licensing, and that's intellectual property. A lot of folks, whether you are, especially nowadays, listen, if we're talking about, I know we fortunately have listeners in various parts of the world and various parts of the country in the U.S., and this is not, true everywhere. Certainly, outside the U.S. and in certain parts outside of big cities, there are still people who make stuff. In fact, I'm down right now as I'm recording this at an entrepreneurs organization retreat with some of my East Bridge members and also with the Latin American conference members, and met some folks from Latin America who still do a lot of manufacturing, but in the U.S. at least, and certainly in a lot of the big cities in the U.S. where there's a lot of population and certainly where a lot of business owners are, most of us don't make anything anymore. Most of us have service businesses, have online businesses, have things where we're providing, where there's mainly service-based businesses. And in those cases, it's often easy to think that you don't have assets, right? There's not a lot of assets often that are showing on your balance sheet. If you look at a financial statement, right, you don't have a lot in furniture, fixtures and equipment, what they call FFE. And maybe you've seen that there's a goodwill line on your balance sheet potentially, but it's hard to think of that because that's an intangible asset, not a tangible asset. It's easy to think, well, yeah, I can sell my company maybe, but I don't have anything else that I could sell. So on the intellectual property side, a while back we had a solocast on licensing and how you could take advantage of the value of that asset, right? Whether it's a trademark or a copyrighted system or a trademark name or a patented, product, and how you might be able to license that for, to have an ongoing income stream and get royalties and things like that. And that's an underutilized asset. But also those assets are potentially saleable, independent of the operating of your company. In fact, it may be something you develop that's ancillary or just a different side of your company. And really what you're selling is that intellectual property, right? That special formula that you've developed or that brand that you've developed. So you can certainly monetize that beyond licensing it, in terms of a sale. And that's something to think about. But the one I said there's one I want to focus on even more. And that is this, what we call a personal goodwill sale. And I think I've mentioned this, but we haven't delved deep into it. And I want to have a solocast that focus mainly on it because most people think if they're employed by somebody that they do not have an asset to sell, right? Because if you're employed by somebody, then the client relationships, the customer relationships are basically owned or, with the employer. So when you leave, even if you have an ability to take business with you, most people will do those kind of transitions in a way where they're joining someone else, where it's just part of what they're bringing along, and they get a salary. They're hired as an employee or as a contractor, and they get paid. And part of what they get paid for is the fact that they have an ability to bring business with them. And, they do monetize that, those relationships in terms of income, right? Because, when somebody's going to employ you, if you, listen, I'm a lawyer, somebody who, has 100,000 or 200,000 or 500,000, or, big firms, they're looking for people with $1 million in business. When they're looking to hire somebody laterally, let's say a lateral partner at a big law firm, right? They're not going to bring you in unless you have a certain amount of business, certainly not to make you a partner, right? And get you some equity. Now, in some ways, you theoretically could monetize that. If you're getting equity in exchange for the business you're bringing in, right? Then that's, a way that you eventually monetize. But in professional services firms, the way you do that is you're usually not getting any kind of big check or any kind of real check up front. You're not getting paid out for that IP you're bringing. You just may be able to, have a partnership interest in the company. In other situations, you're not getting any equity. Many people come, and one of the values they bring is they have some sort of level of relationships, connections, book of business in various fields, and they just get hired, right? And yeah, sure, it helps in terms of how much somebody's willing to pay you and their level of desire to bring you in. But what it doesn't do is allow you to monetize what is really an asset that, and you may not think of it that way. So let me give you a very specific example. As many of you know, we do a lot in financial services, a lot in the wealth management space. And this is not only applicable to that space, but it's where we've done it most, although we've done it in other areas. So we have many situations where, let's say somebody is working at a bank, wirehouse, trust company, or even an independent RIA firm or independent broker dealer, and they're in an employment or contractor model. So they do not own a entity, right? They don't own the RIA firm. Certainly, if they're working at Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley, UBS, or any of the banks or any of the IBDs, they're most often, certainly at the wirehouses banks, in an employment model, and depending upon the IBD platform, possibly an employment model. So the client relationships are with the firm, right? That's who has the contract. That's who, there may be even certain restrictions on people taking business that there are ways to get around. And so when somebody is leaving those places and joining another existing business, they will most often come in as an employee, and then negotiate whatever split they get. Maybe they can negotiate for some equity. Maybe they're going to get some sort of amount of money up front in a forgivable loan structure, which is, traditionally what the wirehouses have done in that industry. And, so it's kind of situation where they get money up front. Yeah, they may get significant money up front, even millions of dollars sometimes, but it is in a loan format and it's forgivable over time. So it if you're there, let's say it's over 5 years or 7 years or 9 years, it forgives proportionally each year that you're there. And then you actually have income as the employee every time that note is forgiven. So, if you take $1 million over 5 years and it's $200,000 a year, the first year, $200,000 forgives, and you end up with $200,000 in income, right? And that's ordinary income, by the way. So ordinary income rates. There's another way to structure those transactions, which is becoming more popular. We actually do a lot of it. But very often when we do it, it's at our suggestion. It's not that the client has really realized they can do this. And what that is you can take that business you have and actually sell it as an asset. Now you might say, well, how is that possible, Corey? Because you just said that the client relationships, that goodwill, that client list is really owned by my employer, right? By the Merrill Lynch or the Morgan Stanley or the independent broker dealer, or take it outside this industry, any industry where somebody is an employee and where the contracts with the customers or the clients are with the employer. What do I have to sell? Well, there's something called personal goodwill. Now, that's a term, that is related to the tax code, because contractually we can create whatever we want. The question is, how is it going to be treated for the tax code purposes, right? Is it going to be treated as if you're selling an asset, meaning that you can get capital gains treatment on the money you get as opposed to ordinary income, like I described in the forgivable loan situation? And the answer is yes. Now, I will tell you the IRS doesn't love these transactions, meaning not that they're illegal or anything wrong with them, but you got to be very careful and you got to structure them and you have the right language and you have to justify the valuation of the personal goodwill. But having said that, if you control a book of business with $1 million in revenue, right, or a client base with $1 million in revenue, just say, and even though those clients are contracted, those customers are contracted with your employer, the fact that you have the ability to move them, and by the way, my little asterisk here, right? I am an attorney. I'm not your attorney. This is not your specific legal advice for you. You need to get legal advice on this. I mean, on anything we talk about on this podcast, and especially on this, because this is tax driven. You need some, tax folks and corporate folks that understand that. So we always actually, even, every deal that I have on this, just because of how sensitive it is, you have to do it right. I always have my tax guy, taking a look at it, right? Even if we've done it 20 times before, over the last few months, we always want them, to check, double check and triple check that language. So in any case, but you can, if you really have that kind of relationship, that's what the personal goodwill is. The personal goodwill says, yes, we understand that the customer or client might be contracted or is contracted with, not with you personally, but with your employer. So that on a balance sheet, that's where that asset is sitting, or contractually, legally, that's where that relationship is set. But we also understand that because of your personal relationship with these clients, because of the level of trust that you've built, because of the practical, situation, if you leave, it's likely a lot of them, if not all of them, right, or a high percentage of them will leave with you. And there's value in that. And not only is there value in that for somebody to just pay you a better salary or be willing to hire you, but we will actually be able to treat that as a saleable asset to another party, under which, pursuant to which you will be able to treat the money you get in exchange for it at capital gains rates. So very simply, how it works is very much like any, once you understand that that's an asset class that can be sold and that can be sold to capital gains rates, it's very similar to anything else, right? It's, whether you're selling equipment or whether you're selling, a client list because you actually own that asset as the company owner, or whatever kind of other asset you're selling. In this case, you are selling personal goodwill, and that's what is being transferred pursuant to a asset purchase or asset sale agreement or personal goodwill sale agreement, whatever it's titled. And that's the asset you're selling. Somebody's paying you for that, either upfront and or, upfront and over time. For your purposes, you take in capital gains, when you get it, you might be able to take it on an installment sale, right? If you're getting the payments over time, so you pay the tax over time, all of that kind of stuff, very similar to if you sold a piece of machinery and, you paid part up front, part over time, and, it would be the same, a similar approach.
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can invite you to a new way to determine your deal readiness. I created a fast and easy assessment that will determine exactly how deal ready you are. Once you complete the assessment, I use your responses to identify the obstacles that are holding you back from being a deal-driven growth genius. It's as easy as heading to CoreyKupfer.com/assessment. That's CoreyKupfer.com/assessment and filling out a few multiple choice questions. I'll be checking in after the episode to see what your results are. Now back to the show.
Now, for the buyer, right? What happens with the buyer? Well, there's some negatives for the buyer, but obviously, and this is often the case, right? I mean, it's very rare. In fact, pretty much if somebody's getting a tax benefit, someone else is getting, the tax treatment is a little more detrimental to them from certain points of view. So from the buyer's point of view, so let's take a scenario where you're coming in, you're leaving someplace, you have a customer client base, somebody else is hiring you, but also instead of hiring you, they're going to do this personal goodwill sale or purchase from their point of view. Well, what's the difference for them? Well, the difference for them is that if they have just hired you, any comp they pay you is ordinary income to you, but that means that it's an expense. It's a deduction to them. So they get an expense deduction in the time that they pay it. In the situation where they are doing the forgivable loan, where it forgives every year, and, I gave that example where it's $1 million over 5 years, $200,000 a year. Well, that first year, the $200,000 gets forgiven. You take in income of $200,000, meaning the employee, the person who had the relationships and brought them in. But the employer, your new employer, gets a deduction for that $200,000 because it's now paid out to you as ordinary income, basically effectively comp or deferred comp, how you want to look at it. And they get a deduction for that 200. Well, if you've structured it as a personal goodwill sale where you're getting capital gains treatment, the difference is now that the buyer, your employer, has to capitalize that. What does that mean? That means, unlike my scenario where they're getting a $200,000 a year deduction, right, on the million over 5 years, if they pay you $1 million in purchase price, because they're buying an intangible asset, the IRS says that that asset is a 15-year asset, right? It's goodwill. So any goodwill is amortized over 15 years. So what does that mean? Let's take my $1 million example. Even if, let's say the payment terms are the $1 million over 5 years as a purchase, they're not going to be able to deduct that $1 million over 5 years. They're going to need to capitalize that $1 million, and they're going to need to take it over a 15-year amortization schedule. So if you do the $1 million, divided by 15, that's the amount that they're going to take, which is obviously a lot less than $1 million divided by 5, right? They're not going to be able to take $200,000 a year. They're going to be able to take essentially 1/3 of $200,000 a year as amortization, when they amortize that goodwill. So for them, they don't get it takes them 15 years to get the tax benefit as opposed to 5. And, they're capitalizing it. And that allows you as the seller of that personal goodwill to get capital gains treatment on it. So obviously, listen, if they were not thinking about structuring it that way, or if you are an employer and want to make your company, listen, it's tough to find good people these days, right? So this could be a good incentive from your point of view to say, hey, we can structure a deal with somebody that we really want to hire who has a book of business potentially as a goodwill purchase, which will be tax beneficial to them. Yes, we understand it's going to take us longer, 15 years to write it off, but we're willing to make that investment because we want that talent, not to mention talent that's bringing business to us, right? So you can distinguish yourself as a employer, acquirer is what it will become, by potentially structuring it that way, especially in a competitive market for people who control business. So, it's an interesting thought. And it's something, again, that's very underutilized. Most people would not think, if they're hiring somebody with business, that they can, buy that, and the person doesn't own the company, that they can, buy that asset. Most people don't even think that there's an asset there, right? They think, oh, the guy, the person, the one man, the woman's got great, great relationships. That's a benefit for me as an employee. Yeah, maybe I'll help monetize them. I'll give them sales commissions or other, bonuses or things like that when they bring in business. But maybe nowadays, when it's very competitive, one of the ways you can help attract key people who've got business is to help them monetize that business in a sale. Now, one thing that's important to note here, and there are a number of things, so we're not going to cover them all here. Remember, you got to get your own advice. It's a complicated area. But one key point is, if you're going to buy the personal goodwill of somebody, which is basically their relationship with their customers or clients, in order to really justify the transaction properly for taxes, you've got to really own that business. So in other words, what's got to come with that are what us lawyers call restrictive covenants, meaning non-solicits, non-competes. So if you really bought an asset, right, you're not going to want the seller to be able to go use that asset, right after you buy it, to your detriment. So, if you set this up and the employee still has the ability to come and go and easily take that business with them when they leave, then it's going to be tough to justify it as a personal goodwill sale under which you have paid money in purchase price, because it's logical that somebody would do that, would protect themselves. So these deals do come with restrictive covenants, non-solicits, non-competes for, a material period of time to really show that the business is locked up and that the buyer, the new employer, has actually bought that asset for real, as opposed to somebody being able to take it with them if they leave tomorrow. If your model is that people can come and go whenever they want, and you don't want to, change that model for these purposes, then a personal goodwill sale will probably not work. Will pretty much not work. So listen, I'm not going to. There's a lot we can get into, delve more deeply, but really, you should get advice on this. But I just want folks to start thinking about, hey, there are assets out there, whether it's the intellectual property scenario or whether it's the personal goodwill scenario, that people can monetize if you are on the side of the person who has the relationships
or the IP, or that you can structure, if you're on the hiring side, in a way that would be tax favorable to them, not to you. But it might be worth it for you, right, to attract key people to be able to do that. One of the things that I've talked about for over 160 episodes for over 3 years on this podcast, and the reason we started this podcast is to just have people think about all of these different types of deals that can be done, and to expand their radar and to start, having that deal maker mindset, and just to understand that deals are not all just big mergers and acquisitions and big financing deals, private equity and venture capital deals and that kind of stuff. Yet there are so many different deals out there that can be done, and doing deals to help grow your business, right? Inorganic growth, deal-driven growth is something that I believe too few companies use. And if you look at any of the companies that have grown significantly, yes, they're usually great at organic growth, at sales and marketing. But they also usually have a inorganic growth, a deal-driven growth strategy. If you're a listener who's been thinking, well, I'm not really ready for buying some company or, doing a major other kind of deal, well, this may be one, that will work for you, right? Look at key people you want to bring on in your industry. Maybe you can distinguish yourself and get somebody who might be more inclined to go somewhere else, where you can say, hey, I can actually help you monetize what you've created here. They probably don't even realize they have an asset that's saleable, and I can do it in a way that's tax advantage for you. So just another thing to think about, another potential deal that you can do, these goodwill sales or purchases, depending on what side you're on, and a way to encourage you to think, hey, maybe there's other things that I don't know, right? Other deals that can be done that I haven't really, thought through yet. Just open up your mind. Hey, we do, like I said, we're doing a lot of these now, and probably they've been around for a while. I'm not saying it's a new thing, but certainly in the high level, the wealth management space, especially, we're finding that this has become much more popular, and not every, a lot of businesses, and frankly, a lot of lawyers in the space don't really understand these kind of deals. But if you do understand them and they fit your circumstances, they could be really great. So with that, folks, I'm going to end this week's episode. Always love doing these solocasts. Have another one coming up in 4 weeks. As most of you know, the rhythm is 3 guest interviews and then a solocast. Definitely check out our subscriber base. Has been growing so significantly recently. It's really, really great that the message is getting out to more and more people. Would love you to share this, give more people access to this. I love talking deals, as you know, and I appreciate all of you. Have a great week.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. Join the DealQuest Deal Den Zoom calls, a free monthly 90-minute mastermind. In the mastermind, we address all the challenges you may be facing and help support you with the opportunities that may arise in terms of deal-driven growth. You will get input not only from me, but all the members on the call will collaborate and serve each other in a mastermind format. To sign up for the free mastermind, go to www.coreykupfer.com/dealden. That's coreykupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.